I think Dr. Vansh has very beautifully covered the preoperative part. Just to summarize again, the acute adverse consequences of hyperglycemia are osmotic dehydration and hypovolemia, acidemia and electrolyte imbalance. Consciousness may be altered, especially in type 2 patients. There is increased proteolysis and lipolysis due to deficiency of insulin. There is worsening of post-traumatic CNS injury, and this is basically due to intracellular acidosis and hypoxia-induced neuronal edema. There are increased chances of infection due to impaired immune response, and it has been seen that the infective complications contribute about 60% of all the post-operative complications in diabetic patients, and about 25% post-operative deaths are due to these infective complications. Some special problems related to anesthesia in diabetic patients are that the physiological age of these diabetic patients is more than the actual age. And the stress response to surgery or anesthesia and very much leading to endocrine response, leading to release of many hormones, cortisol, glucagon, all anti-insulin hormones, so leading to hyperglycemia. There are problems due to comorbidities, which are very common, and problems are due to autonomic neuropathy, problem of difficult intubation, and post-operative infection and poor neurological outcome. Nerve injury is common in patients with peripheral neuropathy, and this is more obvious during positioning and regional anesthesia. You all do PSE of the patients when you get the patient for elective surgery, but you must consider some special points in these patients. First, you must know the duration and type of diabetes, medication and history of hypoglycemia attacks or any history of hospitalization. Now, secondly, level of glycemic control and need of any pre-operative intervention in the treatment strategy, type and duration of surgery, whether there is a minor, major, elective, emergency. It is what are the comorbidities? What is the status of airway? Will the patient have a difficult airway? And the complications, especially cardiovascular, renal, and autonomic. And you must also think that will the patient require ICU care in the post-operative period? And can the patient manage glycemic control after discharge? There are many, actually Dr. Vansh has given many things about this, but just for our postgraduate students, you should have a definite answer to, you don't quote so many things. So usually elective surgery is postponed when the HbA1c is more than 9%. And if the patient is in compromised metabolic state, you should definitely postpone the surgery. The ideal blood glucose level on the morning of surgery should be less than 180 milligram per deciliter. If morning blood glucose level is more than 270, delay the surgery and you can achieve rapid control with IV insulin if you want to conduct the surgery. The target perioperative blood glucose level for most surgical patients is between 120 and 180 milligram per deciliter. Ideally, the HbA1c of the diabetic patients for elective surgery should be between 6.5 and 7. If it is increases, the chances of complications are more. But it has been seen that less stringent levels may be accepted in patients with chronic long-standing diabetes or elderly patients or with multiple comorbidities. But because in those patients, the chances of hypoglycemia are, they usually have attacks of hypoglycemia in the past. So they can, the less stringent level may be accepted. Otherwise, 7.5, 6.5 to 7 is the optimal level. And blood glucose between 120 and 180 is the optimal. The what should be the choice of anesthesia? Actually, there is no evidence that the choice of anesthesia affects the outcome of our diabetic patients, and it actually depends upon the site of the surgery, duration surgery, patients and anesthesia choice, and also the institutional practices or individual practices. But there are some advantages of central neoexit block. They block the stress response to some extent. There are less chances of aspiration if the patient is of gastroparesis, has gastroparesis, less PONV, so oral resumption is earlier, hypoglycemic awareness is there, and difficult airway is avoided. But the few disadvantages are that these patients have more hypotension after giving spinal because there is failure of the cardiovascular compensatory responses. So there is more hypotension. So you should be careful, and then you should reduce the doses of local anesthetics. The chances of infection are high, so you should be very careful, especially after epidural. How to manage diabetes type 2 patients for minor outpatient surgery who is well controlled on OHA. The patient should take his or her normal dose in the night before surgery, in the night before surgery, and don't know OHA in the morning of surgery. And after surgery, oral intake should be started as soon as possible along with OHA. But if the patient is not able to eat properly, then reduce the doses of OHA. And at any stage, if the blood glucose level goes above 200, it is better to give subcutaneous short-acting insulin with monitoring, frequent monitoring. Ideally, the diabetes type 2 patient requiring major surgery should ideally be switched over to insulin, because often the oral intake is delayed, especially after GI surgery or other surgery, abdominal surgery. So it's better to switch over to insulin. Now, which patients require insulin in the perioperative period to control the for glycemic control? Here, all type 1 patients should receive insulin. All type 2 patients who require major surgery and delay in oral intake is expected. The patients who are on multi-drug therapy, the patients who are poorly controlled, and the patients who may require ICU admission in the post-operative period. What should be the pre-operative orders? First in the operation list, that is very important, so that the period time of NPO is reduced and the stress is also reduced. Longer times of NPO, about 8 to 10 hours, are usually prescribed in patients who have gastroparesis. As Dr. Vansh already said, that 30 to 40% patients have gastroparesis. So the NPO period should be prolonged in these patients. Obtain fasting blood glucose in the morning of surgery. And these patients should be pre-medicated with SU blockers, anxiolytics, and gastric prokinetics. I think this he has covered, but few words about metformin. Metformin should be stopped 1 to 2 days before surgery, as it can cause lactoacidosis. Although it is rare, but the chances are high, or risk is high in patients whom you expect to have a more prolonged period of hypotension during surgery, or patients who are to be given IV contrast dye. In these patients, the chances of lactosis is high, and the patient who are alcoholic or have hepatic and renal dysfunction. In these patients, should be stopped for 1 to 2 days before surgery. And the metformin should be started only after the normal renal function has been restored. And especially in patients where IV contrast dye has been given, it is better to start metformin only after you obtain a normal creatinine level and normal urine output. Thiazolidine, these all are stopped in the morning because the chances of cardiac events are high in patients who are receiving rosiglitazone, pioglitazone. Sulfonylurea should also be stopped because they block potassium ATP channels, which are responsible for ischemia and anesthesia-induced preconditioning. GLP agonists delay the gastric emptying, so they should be also stopped. GPPO emitters can be continued till morning of surgery. What about the patients who are controlled on insulin? Ideally, the patient receiving long-acting insulin should be switched over to intermediate acting. And if the patient is receiving separate injection of short-acting and intermediate acting or long-acting, then in the evening before surgery, the usual dose of short-acting insulin should be given, but reduce the dose of long-acting by 20%. And in the morning of surgery, omit short-acting and reduce the dose of long-acting by 50%. Patients who are receiving pre-mixed 30-70 or other preparations, reduce evening dose by 20% and omit morning dose. Patients on insulin pump, reduce overnight dose by 30%. Though covered by Dr. Vansh, still I just to summarize or I'll go for a few points. Consider IRSI, rapid sequence induction in patients with gastroparesis. Avoid linger rectate solution for food management as it is a substrate for neoglucogenesis. Careful positioning is very important in patients with peripheral neuropathy, and padding of the pressure points must be done. For example, heel should be very should be positioned in a very nice way. And with patients on with autonomic neuropathic, there is increased hemodynamic liability in response to induction of anesthesia, in response to positive pressure ventilation, in response to positioning after spinal anesthesia and blood loss. So you have to be very careful. And the patients who have absent or heart rate variation, who have absent or deranged heart rate variation, are as have very high chances of developing ventricular arrhythmias, silent MI or sudden death. So you should be careful. There is a possibility of difficult airway. Lower doses should be used in central venous blockage, and frequent monitoring of blood glucose is very important. For intraoperative hyperglycemic control, there are there are many methods, but 2 or 3 are most commonly used. One is Alberti regime, Velo regime, and continuous separate infusion of glucose and insulin. This Velo regime was developed in our own country and is very good. For this, you obtain fasting blood glucose at 6 a.m. on the day of surgery, omit OHA or insulin, and mix 5 units of regular insulin in 5% dextrose in water and start at the rate of 100 ml per hour. If blood glucose is less than 100, stop insulin infusion and give measured volume of 100 ml of dextrose in water, 5% dextrose in water by a burette. And for every 1 to 50 milligram of blood glucose above 100, add 1 unit of insulin to 100 ml of 5% dextrose in water in a measured volume burette and give at the rate of 100 ml per hour. And during this regime, blood sugar should be measured every hour, and this regime is continued till patient leaves PASU. The advantages of this regime are that is simple, user-friendly, and no need of infusion pumps. Burette is enough for this giving. This Albertine regime, I think the oldest one, still used at some places. Omit morning dose and obtain fasting blood glucose. Mix 10 units of short-acting insulin and 10 millimole of potassium chloride to 500 ml of 10% dextrose in water. This is called a 10-10-10. Just to remember how to make 10-10-10. And start this infusion at the rate of 100 to 150 ml per hour. Measure blood glucose every 3 hours. This is safe, simple, and no need an infusion pump. But the problem is that this fine control of blood glucose is difficult by this. Now coming to continuous infusion of insulin and glucose by separately. To make the infusion of insulin, 100 units of insulin are dissolved in 100 ml of normal saline, thus making 1 unit per ml. To calculate initial hourly rate of insulin, total daily dose of insulin is divided by 24. Or you can use another thing, find out the morning blood glucose level divided by 150. Or if the patient is for CABG, is on steroids, or is pregnant or requires neurosurgery, then you may divide this morning blood glucose level by 100. Or most simple is that 0.02 units per kg per hour, or 1 to 1.4 units per hour in most patients is very good for this, for majority of the patients. And regular insulin sliding scale, RISS, can be added to maintain target blood glucose that you all know between 120 to 180. Or alternatively, you may reduce the insulin infusion or increase the ideal continuous infusion of insulin should be initiated at least 2 hours before surgery, along with infusion of 5% dextrose in NBI2 saline at the rate of 100 to 150 ml per hour. You must have heard about tight control regime or intensive insulin therapy. What is this? This refers to control of blood glucose level within narrow range of 70 to 110 milligram per deciliter. There has been some evidence for better outcome in CABG, pregnancy, or neurosurgery or ICU patients, but hypoglycemia was very common in this technique, and it requires frequent monitoring and is difficult to continue in the post-operative period. So this technique is not generally recommended. Some points you must remember for a diabetic patient, that 1 unit of insulin lowers blood glucose level by 25 to 30 milligram per deciliter. 1 unit of insulin neutralizes 3.25 grams of glucose, and 1 ml of 50% dextrose in water increases blood glucose by 2 milligram per deciliter. Minimum 5 to 10 grams glucose per hour, minimum 150 grams, is needed to prevent hepatic production of glucose, lipolysis, and proteolysis. Minimum 150 gram glucose must be given. Insulin requirement is higher in patient undergoing CABG, receiving steroids, hyperalimentation, vasopressors, having infection, or when the BMI is more than 35. And level of glucose in capillary and arterial blood is 7% higher than venous blood, and whole blood glucose is 15% lower than plasma or serum. Coming to the post-operative management, insulin glucose infusion should be continued at least up to 2 hours after surgery. And OHA and normal insulin regime the patient was following in the pre-operative period can be started with first meal. One thing is important, that 1 hour overlap is essential between stopping IV insulin and starting subcutaneous insulin. For insulin, and what should be the dosage of insulin? Either you can use the patient's own regime, which was followed initially before surgery, or it can be calculated by dividing patient's previous day total insulin dose by 3 and give it subcutaneously with meals. That means before breakfast, before lunch, and before dinner, after measuring blood glucose level. Adequate anesthesia is important for these patients. PONV treatment is mandatory because it may delay oral resumption of fluids of diet. Now coming to, you may often get a patient of diabetes for gangrene foot or debridement of a ulcer with a diabetic patient. Usually these patients maybe in a patient may be in a decompensated state, that the patient may be in DK or HHS, or may not be in the condition. But for those patients, what we will do quick PSC with special point related to DM, as already told by Vansh. And you should know the type and doses of anti-diabetics, whether patient is on insulin or patient is on oral OHA. And when did the patient take last meal and the medication? You must find it out. You should also inquire about any other concurrent illness or medication. Hemodynamic status of the patient should be known. Is there any fever? Find out the urine output and level of consciousness. And find out current blood glucose level, urinary ketones, electrolytes, bicarbonate, pH, etc. And if the patient is in the decompensated metabolic state, then surgery should be delayed at least for 4 to 6 hours for management. This is a clinical finding, I think you can see from the book. Basic difference between DK and HHS is that patient of DK is absolute deficiency of insulin, leading to hyperglycemia, ketonemia, and dehydration. And in HS patient, hyperglycemia, mental status may be disturbed, and this the patients has a very viscous blood and high osmolality of the blood. This is a biochemical criteria you all can see from the book. What is the principle of management of DKHHS? Confirmation of diagnosis by clinical findings and laboratory findings, correction of dehydration, hyperglycemia, electrolyte imbalance, and acidosis, and frequent monitoring. The finding and treating the cause which has precipitated this condition. Surgical patients, most likely the gangrene foot, and the medical patient, usually the cause may be pneumonia, myocardial infarction, pregnancy, any other cause may be there. In the surgical patient, most likely the cause is diabetic gangrene. It is important that delay of surgery until complete correction of DKHS is unwarranted, as surgical condition can further lead to metabolic derangement. So do not wait for complete remission of the condition. Once a stable level is achieved, then you can go for surgery. For management, IV fluids are the most important. Give 1 liter of normal saline over first 30 minutes, then 1 liter over 1 hour, then 1 liter over 2 hours, then 1 liter over 2 to 4 hours, followed by N/2 saline at the rate of 250 to 500 ml per hour. When the blood glucose is less than 270, then start 5% dextrose in water at the rate of 1 liter 8 hourly. Monitor blood pressure, urine output, and CVP if necessary. The IV insulin, short-acting insulin is used, usually 0.1 unit per kg as bolus, followed by 0.1 unit per kg per hour as infusion. If blood glucose does not fall by 10% in first hour, then give 0.14 units per kg as bolus and continue infusion at the same rate. Blood glucose usually decreases by 75 to 100 milligram per deciliter per hour. Continue same treatment till the patient is stable and blood glucose is in the range of 150 to 200. Then reduce insulin infusion to half. That means 0.05 units per hour. The replacement of potassium is of importance in these patients because of osmotic diuresis, serum potassium falls, and when and due to acidosis, the potassium from cells moves out into the serum. So the potassium level may be normal or even raised. And as soon as the acidosis is corrected, potassium level starts falling. So it is important to know about this condition by then. And if serum is less than 3.3 milliequivalent per liter, do not give insulin until serum potassium is corrected. Give potassium at the rate of 20 milliequivalent per liter. And if serum potassium is more than 5.2, do not give potassium unless acidosis is corrected. You must remember those things. Monitor blood glucose every 1 to 2 hours. pH, electrolytes, bicarbonates, anion gap every 4 hours. Bicarbonate should be given. There is controversy in bicarbonate therapy, but should be given only if pH is less than 6.9. You have managed the patient, then when to, the surgeon is asking, when will you get my case done? So, when to go for surgery? For DK, blood glucose level should be 250 or less. pH should be more than 7.3. Bicarbonates more than 18. And decrease in ketones 0.5 millimole per hour. Calculated anion gap should be less than 12 millimoles per liter. For HHS, patient should improve mentally and blood glucose level should be 300 or less, and osmolality, serum osmolality should be less than 320 milliosmol per liter. For NSAID management, there is nothing very special, especially lower limb surgery, gangrene or low extremity block may be given or spinal anesthesia may be chosen depending on the patient or your ability. But you have to reduce the doses of local anesthetic for spinal anesthesia and should be careful that extreme precautions are taken that no infection there is there. Or avoid, if you are giving a block, avoid addition of epinephrine to local anesthetic because it increases chances of ischemic and injury due to edema. So do not use epinephrine. Additional management in that patient, put nasogastric tube if patient is unconscious or semi-conscious, or if vomiting is protracted. Put a urinary catheter, CVP if required, and antibiotics if infection is suspected. Just a few lines about diabetes and pregnancy. The chances of hydramnios and hypertensive diseases is common in pregnant patients. Insulin requirement in pregnancy is high, but it dramatically falls after delivery of baby. So you should be very, very careful. Liver anesthesia can be provided very good, but avoid infection. Single shot spinal for cesarean delivery is very good. Risk of large-sized baby, macrosomia, and neonatal hypoglycemia is high. Should be careful about these things. Now, some questions that are asked, frequently asked, you may say, what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is less than normal or delayed biological response to insulin and is usually related to response to receptors. This insulin resistance increases in the perioperative period due to counter-regulatory hormones, FFA and cytokines. What is hypoglycemic unawareness? It is failure to have conscious recognition of low blood glucose level. It is usually seen in long-standing diabetes mellitus with frequent bouts of hypoglycemia where due to sympathetic block, due to this autonomic neuropathy, or where the patient, when the patient is on beta blockers or is taking alcohol. It is also not seen in patients sedated or with who are anesthetized. But be careful that hypoglycemic unawareness may also be seen in awake patients, and it is due to loss of sympathetic response to hypoglycemia. What is hypoglycemia? Clinically significant hypoglycemia is defined by Whipple's triad, which has symptoms of neuroglycopenia and symptoms of adrenergic excess, and blood glucose level less than 50 milligram per deciliter in adults and less than 40 in children, and relief of symptoms with glucose administration. Symptoms of neuroglycopenia are headache, mental sluggishness, blurring of vision, drowsiness, coma. And symptoms of adrenal excess are palpitation, sweating. Treatment is sugar cubes, glucose tabs, or juice if the patient is conscious. But if the patient is unconscious, then give 50 ml of 50% dextrose in water intravenously. And if the symptoms do not improve or blood glucose does not improve, then you may give the infusion also. If veins are not available, then you may give 0.5 to 0.5 to 1 milligram glucagon by intramuscular injection. I think symptom suggestive of Dan, I think Dr. Vansh has covered it well. Some tests. This is important. The test should be done only if the clinical history and examination are not conclusive. They are not. You are not supposed to do every test in every patient. Only if you are not sure of the diagnosis. This has been also well covered. This has also been well covered. Now, a few words about HbA1c. It is a measure of percent of hemoglobin that has been non-enzymatically glycosylated by glucose on beta chains and indicates blood glucose control over preceding 8 to 12 weeks. Level of HbA1c of more than 8.6 corresponding to average blood glucose level of 200 milligram per deciliter is considered as poorly controlled. The value of HbA1c is not accurate and not reliable in patients with hemoglobin abnormalities and after massive blood transfusion or with rapid RBC turnovers, for example, in hemolysis. Raised HbA1c in surgical patients is associated with increased morbidity, mortality, MI, infection. Each increase in HbA1c by 1% increases risk of complications by 40%. Optimal HbA1c for surgical patients, as I already told you, is between 6.5 and 7. Now, just to conclude, just to have key points, long-standing hyperglycemia has macro and macrovascular complications. Maintain near normoglycemia, blood glucose between 120 to 180. Prevent hemodynamic instability, metabolic derangement, and hypoglycemia. Frequent blood glucose monitoring is the mainstay in management of surgical patients. Patients with diabetes type 1 must receive some basal insulin, even blood glucose is normal. Otherwise, ketosis may be there. General anesthesia must sign of hypoglycemia, so frequent blood glucose monitoring during general anesthesia. Hypoglycemia unawareness can also be seen in awake patients. Tight perioperative glucose control no longer recommended. High risk of hypoglycemia is in patients who are taking long-acting insulin and long-acting OHA. Ideally, there is no cutoff blood glucose level to cancel the surgery, but blood glucose less than 180 milligram per deciliter is optimal, and if it is more than 250, it leads to impaired leukocyte function, so high risk of infection. Perioperative hyperglycemia increases risk of stroke, ILS, infection, and longer hospital stay and death. The chief aim of our management is to achieve outcome equivalent to non-diabetic patients. Thank you so much.